Thanks for coming here. Sorry, we had a few technical problems at the beginning. So my name is Bob Nist. I'm the interim CIO for Regenstrief, and I'll give a quick introduction of myself, and hopefully I can figure out how to move the slides as well. I'll take a shot with this. Just to introduce myself, I'm just here in a couple of months here as the interim CIO. I've been a consultant with the IU School of Medicine just prior to that. And was asked to kind of come help out with Susan and her team while we look for the permanent CIO. My background is actually a 35-year Lilly employee. I was in the IT and R&D and manufacturing space as the interim or as the divisional CIO for those areas. And then retired and flunked retirement very quickly. Went back to work up at Rockwell in Milwaukee. And then also retired and flunked again and doing consulting now. So apparently I need to work on my retirement skills, which I will do at some point. So I'm here to talk a little bit today about the overall structure of Regenstrief Data Services and just what the groups do. So hopefully those of you online, I believe many of you are either in Regenstrief or are researchers. So hopefully some of this information will be useful. So again, the group that I lead at the moment is the Regenstrief Data Services group. We have a couple different portions of that group that I'll talk about. But our mission is obviously to leverage all of the good history and current talent that is all around our data and our information and informatics assets to help researchers answer new and important scientific questions really in all stages of their process, whether it's study design, algorithm validation, implementation, or creating initial data sets for folks to use for their research. And the group is made up of three different parts. First, Faye Smith, who leads our data core, and that's probably been maybe one of the longest areas here within the Regenstrief Data Services team. Tony French leads our technical services team, and then a brand new group that we're trying to create and get off the ground here with Shahid Kokar leading our client success team. So he's been in the role for a couple of months now as well, and we're just building that organization, and I'll talk through a little bit of each of these three organizations as I go through, probably in sequence there, left to right. So we'll start with the data core. So what is it that Faye's team is working on? Primarily, again, interacting with researchers at the beginning of their process up to the point where they get data. So this would be feasibility counts, things like can they get the kind of patient populations and data sets that they want, advice on how the data sources are. None of these sources are perfect in today's world, so there are some limitations that we need to get across to folks. We extract and compile data sets and help create registries for people to do their research on. And then facilitating, I think, some of the chart reviews and doing some of the text mining against the notes that are in primarily the data warehouses from our sources that I'll talk about here in a second. So the core is probably the more well-known part, I think maybe the longer serving part of research data services. As a team. So as I mentioned, these data sources are interesting. They're very unique in some cases, like the INPC, the Indiana Network for Patient Care, specifically done for research, is a very unique asset across the country, pulling together a lot of information. The Health Exchange, IHI, the Indiana Health Exchange, uses that same database for commercial and clinical purposes. And then we in Regenstrief use that for research purposes. And the other two key data sources that we have are the IU Health Data Warehouse from Cerner and Eskenazi's data warehouse from Epic. These two help us augment and perhaps in some cases patch a few of the problems that we will see in the INPC data, which is a little messier, I would say, in general. So those three data sources are our primary. We can obviously do other things too. when there are external needs and working with external research partners, we can get involved in other things. But these three are the primary of where Regenstrief gets most, where the data services team operates. So the INPC itself, again, I'm probably preaching to the choir or people that know more about this than I do. But a very unique asset where over 120 hospitals, labs, insurance companies, those kinds of places are providing data across the state of Indiana. You can see kind of the growth and of coverage of that data over time from 2000 up to today. And these, as I understand it from Faye, are based on people who've had an interaction in the last year with the health system or so. Even probably broader coverage and a little bit darker, denser map there on the right for someone who's had any interaction in Indiana with the health system. So again, over 120 institutions sending our data. Lots of different types of data are sent, and some of those have changed over time, where the hospitals may have been sending one thing earlier and then they chose not to, or later on decided to send some data when things like COVID happened. There were additional changes to that. So it's a living, breathing kind of thing and growing, and a very unique asset, very rare within this country. I don't think there's any other state that has quite the coverage of something like the INPC. Two other key things we'd like you to know about and be aware of, particularly for those of you that are researchers looking to understand what data might help fuel your research. So there's the data guide and the data catalog. So this first one here is the picture of the PDF you can download from our website that has a data core, has the data core guide, kind of tells you about these data sources, what kinds of information would be useful to you in your research, and is again freely available on the website. The second one is the data catalog that's also on our website and will help you look at and take maybe an understanding of where some of the limitations of these data sources may affect your research. So in particular, you can go in and look at the different sources. You can see, hey, this used to be sent from this period, or here's a gap where it was not sent and then was started again, or other kinds of limitations to things that that are in the source data. Remember, these are many hospital systems across the state. They have a primary business and it's probably not research data. So these systems are really useful, but they do have a few wrinkles to them that we need researchers to be aware of. And things we can cover and some things we can't. So occasionally we can go to the data warehouses if the time and the patient population is correct from Cerner and Epic, and fill in some of the data or augment that data. So as you are looking at your research, the data core is there and available to help you understand the nuances and see what we can do to provide the data that you need. So that's the data core. Again, probably the more well-known and longer part of the research data services. A little while later, I think the research technical, Regenstrief Technical Services Group was brought together under the same team. And this team is involved in a number of things as well. They obviously collaborate with the data core to help provide registries and or do some of the extract and transforming and loading of data, mapping it into different things and pulling that through to the customer. So that's one of the things they provide, but they do a number of other things to augment the data as well. Services like geocoding, where we can get that data down to census units, augmenting kind of what research could be done, helping with registries, helping with a number of other pieces around the data as well, de-identification, for instance, as a service out of this team. But they also get very involved in other kinds of application development, depending on what is the need of the research team, and do they have both the need and the funding to be able to provide additional things. So getting more into things like EHR integration, building applications from scratch, or doing some integration among applications. And I think some of those things are very interesting as well. One of those is also things like becoming an honest data broker for external research partners, and being able to take data and synchronize it in a way that still preserves the privacy for that research, and then being able to link that data and still send it out to be done for the right research. So a lot of interesting things being done in this group as well. One of those is also infrastructure and looking at our security, privacy, and risk management. Many of you would know that in today's world, you'll see headlines of breaches at various companies. We'd like to not be on that, that list and be out there being known for that. So we take very seriously security and risk management, and those need to be augmented and growing in today's very, very complex world where the threats get more sophisticated and where our ability to respond correctly and quickly is very, very critical. So a number of areas that we work in there obviously is trying to help people with security by design, but also adopting some frameworks for how to manage our risk, how to manage our security. This is in collaboration with other parts of the School of Medicine and other parts of IU to help us look at, again, total risk management. How do we manage threats? Are we doing the right things from a security and privacy perspective? And then what kinds of responses would we have to anything that is occurring out there in the very complex world? So you'll see more and more, I think, capability and management in this particular field and domain. That's another thing that's under the tech services group. In addition to security, obviously there's the provisioning or acquiring of the right infrastructure. What kind of compute resource do we need? Where does that need to be located? Either on in-house servers working with IU or on cloud-based servers to connect with other teams of research. So it's, again, a relatively complex area that's growing and changing all the time. And no, I don't have any relation to the Nist framework there. However, if you do look up Robert and Nist, you'll occasionally see me in the Nist organization. One of the things we're working on, and this is very hard to see now that I look at the chart, but is moving toward a standards-based data for research that can interoperate with other research organizations as well as other databases. So we've been working quite a bit to be able to create registries at the beginning, but eventually to have that full copy of the INPC data augmented in the way we want for research, available in the Odyssey OMOP format, which is very much being adopted across a number of different research areas, to enable researchers to be able to mix and match and potentially cooperate with other places for data. We have a couple of pink things up at the top that would represent, could we as a proposal begin to work with IU Health and Eskenazi to have OMOP formatted versions of their databases in addition to ours, again, so that we have access to other research connectivity, but also some of the great wealth of tools out there being created by many, many different academic institutions to improve data and to do checks and quality improvement types of things around research data. So one of the main strategies you'll hear about from us is moving toward OMOP and making that both for our own efficiency and for connectivity externally. As I mentioned, application engineering, all kinds of different flexible needs, whether it's machine learning algorithm development there on the left, a true mobile or a web application for a user interface for some purpose, or integration into other systems, particularly EMRs, et cetera, where we need to connect systems together. That kind of service is what we offer out of the application engineering team. And again, depending on the research needs, we can work with you to understand what's possible and what's practical to be done in that case. All right, so we've talked about the data core where we get all that data together, and then the application engineering teams that have been working on different facets. This particular team also gets heavily engaged in that honest data broker, being able to get tokens for for data that does continue to preserve that privacy, link the appropriate records, and then pass that back out, all within this team. The last team that I want to talk about is Shahid's team that we're trying to create, which is this new client success organization. We recognize that we can be occasionally a complex area to deal with, and we want to streamline how folks interact with us, but also how we collaborate with other parts of the institution here, whether it's IU Health, whether it's Eskenazi, whether it's the School of Medicine or dentistry, optometry, et cetera. So we've been looking at how do we create this group for ourselves, a single point of contact that also then collaborates with where else might the researcher need to go. I've been talking particularly with the Office of Clinical Research and the statistics teams in IU, the School of Medicine, to say, where can we have collaborative and cooperative support for the researcher, both from figuring out their feasibility and getting their data, but also where do they execute their work? How do we continue to make that secure, appropriately preserving privacy, et cetera? So this is one of the newest areas in the organization. We're just staffing and building it now, but its intent is to truly have a better experience for the researcher and start to really, I guess, look at that process a little more end to end than just here's some data we provide or here's an application. So stay tuned for that. You'll hear more about that, but I think as we build this group, it will have, I hope, a good experience for our researchers, a big impact on that. Great. And then the last slide I want to talk about, just a little bit of the priorities and plans, and then we'll hopefully have questions. I realize we were a bit short on the timeline to start. So first, we want to continue to meet the service and project commitments that are already there. We have a lot of folks that are dedicated to doing their work, have a lot of history, and are here because they see what the impact of doing this research is. So I'm very thankful for that and appreciate what the group has been doing. When I look at project priorities for the team, the top three things that jump out are truly looking at our quality improvement project. And by quality improvement there, I mean in all three aspects: quality of the data that we actually deliver to folks. How can we continue to always make that as good of a data set as we can? Quality in our execution. Not sure what that is. Hopefully not something that'll land on me. Quality in the processes we execute. So this would be making ourselves as reliable and efficient as we can to make sure we can serve as many researchers for the same investment as we can. And then quality in the expectations. So as I mentioned earlier, sometimes there are gaps in the data. Sometimes there are things that we can do. So we want to, and things that we can't. So we want to be very clear with researchers when they come to us. We want to make those commitments based on data and on our ability to execute, and then stick to those timelines from a reliability standpoint. So that first priority is really all around all three aspects of quality in the work that we do. The second one is the one I mentioned, and you saw the flow chart on, and that is moving toward the ability to have this OMOP formatted data set for research. This will make us more efficient internally because it's where we'll create our registries from and begin to have much higher reusability of the work that we do. But in addition, we hope that it truly makes us more capable of connecting. And as researchers get involved in multi-center, multi-institution types of work, we're in a better position to more quickly meet those needs. So that OMOP piece is critical for us. And as I mentioned before as well, security, privacy, and compliance, making sure we do our work in a way that preserves all of the privacy for the patients. You know, it's interesting that although our group puts together all of these things, we are not the owners of any of this data. We are stewards, and we have a responsibility to behave appropriately with that data and protect it. So those are our three basic kind of project priorities. Lots and lots of other work going on. We have a tremendous number of either feasibility requests or things going on with grant teams, et cetera. So lots of other work. So the last couple deal with that. again, implementing this client success organization that we've talked about, that Shahid will lead, taking us through that to improve that researcher experience, but also then aligning our resources for the best execution that we can and the best efficiency. The easier we are to work with and the more data we have about our own performance, we'll be able to commit as reliably as possible to the work that we need to get done for you. So really, again, all three parts, getting the data together, helping with application development and other IT types of support as needed, and then making sure the experience that all of you have with Regenstrief Data Services is as positive and seamless as we can make that. So that's the last of my kind of slides about the three parts of the group. Sure why that didn't move ahead. But that was my last slide. If I could see whether we have any questions online, and I'm not sure if I can see these or not. Okay, great. So yeah, if you have questions or just comments you want to make, that'd be great. If anybody in the room does, or if there are any online, if they could be read out.
I'll jump in if that's okay. All right. Thank you so much, Bob. We really appreciate overview of RDS and are really grateful for your willingness to step into this role and bring your expertise to bear to help us move RDS forward. I'm really, I think it would be interesting for everyone to hear a little bit more of some of the metrics you're thinking about related to quality improvement. And I know that things are still in development, but I also know you have talked with the team and have a lot of ideas about how you can actually measure movement in these quality improvement areas that you've identified here.
Great. No, thanks, Susan. Good question. So around the metrics that we use for the team, the historical metrics have been very much sort of a view of activity. So it would be, for instance, how many individual researchers have we supported, those kind of things. Those are useful, but not as useful, I think, as perhaps outcome-based measures. So as Susan mentioned, we're very interested in something we call right the first time, where we can begin to measure, and it takes a little bit of work and thought to figure that out. But for delivery of a data set, what data checks have we run against it? What processes have we run against it to make sure that data is as accurate and complete as we can make it? And then what kind of customer feedback can we get on that? So the right the first time metric will evolve over time. It'll start with data core and data delivery. And it's primarily an internal assessment right now. We want to then grow that to say, well, what did the customer think about the data they received? Because we recognize the last thing a researcher wants to do when they get the data is to then say, oh, well, now I either can't trust it or I need to look through it and fix it. So one of those is going to be all around right the first time. How much can we do that? How that applies to software development gets a little touchier and trickier because clearly you get into how clear are the requirements. In some cases, the researcher themselves has a good idea of what they want, but they haven't actually gotten a very, very specific idea. But we'll come up with something around, do we know the requirements? And then are we delivering the software after that as appropriately as possible? And we would see that in any agile development methodology is the ability to estimate that correctly. The third one for me, and the most important one, will be under the client success idea. What is the customer feedback? What would they tell us is good and bad about working with us? And what kind of metric from a satisfaction? And not just hopefully a survey, but actually sitting down with folks and getting the feedback on. These are the things that didn't work well, and these are the things that did. The last metric, I guess, not to take too long on the metrics question, but would be performance. And to me, that's going to be efficiency. Can we show that for the same investment, we're getting more feasibility requests, we're getting more data set delivery and more application development done for the same investment or equivalent investment? I don't know if that helps, Susan, but that's kind of in those four ideas. It's that right the first time, then applying right the first time to software, getting a customer input, and then financial performance and efficiency would be where we'd like to go. Okay, thanks. Any other questions in the room, or looks like there may be one online?
Bill Tierney wants to know what the costs are for accessing RDS.
Hi, Bill. It's good to talk to you again or hear a question from you. You know, I'm not sure I have a direct answer for that yet. The costs, it is clear that we have a group that's funded in different ways, either from grants, from money that the institution has, et cetera. So we need to be good stewards of that investment. The engagement, so some of that cost for a researcher is covered by those financial contributions, for instance, on feasibility requests. If they go beyond a certain size, we do have to then look at, and one of the feedback pieces of feedback we have received is, I don't know when I'm going to be charged and when I'm not, and how do I bring that data into my grant? So it's a great question, Bill, and it's one that we need to do some more work on. But certainly we want to, when I mentioned kind of at the bottom there, implementing that client success organization, it has to do with, do we have the resources and do we know the cost of that? And are we as transparent as we can be with the customer so they know this is funded and I'm good, or no, this would be something you would need to help us fund either through a grant or through your own areas, and be as transparent and clear on that and accurate on that as we can be. I think that's newer for the group at this point. So we don't have a lot of track record on doing that yet. But your point is exactly spot on, Bill. We need to be able to be a reliable estimator, which kind of gets to one of our key problems. There has been that alignment of work and resource to be efficient and to be repeatable and reliable. So probably not a satisfactory an answer there for Bill, but we'll continue to make that go better. Any other questions? Titus may have one.
Yeah, a couple of questions. Thank you very much. I want to start with the question of technical debt. What kind of technical debt do you see in RDS? What is its impact? And what are you doing to ameliorate that?
Yes, great question. And any IT organization does have technical debt for sure. I think we do have a bit, particularly around the structure of the INPC, which has not been significantly changed. And I would say both of the data warehouses that we rely on are also relatively older and not in standard formats. Then I would say we have an infrastructure that is older and all on premise with IU, some of which is appropriate, but it's not as flexible as I would see. So I would have to say, from my assessment, relatively significant amount of technical debt. The impact, as you probably would guess, is it makes us less efficient, less able to do new, and we're spending more of our time. I hope that water doesn't cause this screen to go crazy. More of our time and effort and energy, thank you, Susan, on having to manage that versus being able to meet new requirements, right? So what we're going to try to do about that is a couple of things. One is to, again, significantly look at our infrastructure. Where can we use and take advantage of? That's thanks to Jimmy John for helping me dry the computer on. So that we start taking more advantage of the modern infrastructures that are there, although they can be a little expensive to move to. Once you're there, your flexibility, scalability, performance, reliability, all of those things are much enhanced. Now that doesn't address your technical debt of what's your code written in, what is your database technology, et cetera. Again, aligning toward mostly open source type IT tools is the other thing that we would look at for that. And that's why the OMOP project is so critical for us. The more we get to that ability to use and leverage other people's intellectual work, then the technical debt can be managed, but you're kind of multiplying your ability to tap into other tools. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Two more questions. You had I2B2 on one of your slides. Do we know how many investigators in Regenstrief and outside of it use I2B2? this time? What do they think about it? What are the limitations and so on?
Great question. I have no idea. A couple of months in, I don't know if Tony or Shahid happens to know that, or Brian or you, Titus. I don't have any of that information on.
As you probably aware. Thanks, Titus. No, our ITV2 adoption has historically been pretty low. It's a tool that's available to researchers, has been available to researchers, but just the publication and awareness of it as being a tool that's freely available to use. Yep.
Yeah, we'd love to encourage use and to, the highest use of the tools that are there, or if there's feedback from the customer base on, here's why I'm not using it, then maybe we can address that and make it more useful.
Yeah, as you know, I2B2 usage has a direct effect on the number of feasibility requests that the data core gets.
Yep.
And the more we can push our views to I2B2, the less the CTSI budget will be strained by feasibility requests.
Agreed. And that kind of brings up the same point of, I would love to get us more and more towards self-service tools where the researcher can answer their question going online and more quickly do that. We don't have a lot of those yet, and I think your point there is exactly spot on too. How do we encourage the usage, and then how do we get the most out of what we have?
Yeah, so a little anecdote. I requested the current I2B2 documentation like 3 weeks ago. The current version is dated October 5, 2017. And what you see on the screen doesn't exactly match what's in the documentation. So speaking of technical debt, might be an easy win here. Last question. So, you and I have, and others have had quite a few conversations about, lots of the topics you had on your slides. How do we ensure that what you're doing currently and what you're planning doesn't fall into the common pattern here of things getting buried in leadership changes and things getting lost? In the RDS space, we have plenty of anecdotes from the last 5 years of that. And I would like us not to repeat history again. How do we do that?
I suppose you have to start with those who don't study history are doomed to repeat it, right? As the quote goes. So I would need to understand a little bit more, because I have seen a significant amount of leadership change, and still some. Obviously, I'm interim, right? So the leadership change is still going to be there. So we need to find ways to get that continuity. To me, part of that is what the quality initiative is all about. That the more we have reliable execution processes that we follow, that are externally sort of audited and encourage us to be efficient. That's one of the ways you do that, is you try to take out the individualness of our execution. So that's one. The other parts are, I would love to understand more about what has been the history there. And is it connectedness to the outcomes of what our researchers are trying to do? Does that help, insulate against the change? Great question. I don't know enough about how to affect that just yet. But would certainly be open to anybody that does know.
Sean has posed a question in the chat. Sean Granis is asking, can you comment on if and how much the unclear requirement challenge applies to data requests as well as software development? And then he has a follow-up comment. The unclear requirement, quote unquote, issue was mentioned WRT software development.
Not sure I know what, with respect to, I assume is what the WRT means.
That's with respect to, yes.
Yeah, Sean, I would completely agree that requirements in both the data side and I think far more on the application development software engineering side, but even on the data side, I think there are times where the researcher doesn't yet know what they need, either from a software or a data perspective, and they need some ability to iterate that. Clearly, the impact is huge, right? When you can fix something at the requirement stage versus fixing it at the testing stage versus it's already out there and now we need to go back and retroactively fix things. We've all seen those curves that show how much more expensive it is to do that. Which is why, to me, I would love this client success organization to be focused on, let's be as clear as possible on the requirement, having one point of contact so that you don't have handoffs. You know, one of the things you help to reduce that is if you have handoffs between teams, then we're playing the telephone tag game where the fidelity of that signal gets worse. So you want to have that single point of contact taking you from the data request to the software request, et cetera. So I do think it's a significant issue for us, particularly when we do relatively custom development on every request. Then the requirements then us being really good at requirement solicitation is more and more critical to our ability to meet the need. So how do we address that? I think some of that is we may need a little higher focus of some of our resource that is focused on the requirements elicitation as opposed to the execution part, which is why you'll see us add a little more resource to that client success organization. It's also project management. It's also the quality of our processes. They all kind of are a virtuous circle there to make us better at all of those. But I do worry about that. I think the requirements piece is one of the hardest things to get right in the IT world, and in particular, innovative, leading edge. This is not, you know, doing payroll again, where we kind of all know the requirements for payroll. Many times the requirements are being brand newly generated. So, great question. All right. Anything else online?
We have another
We
question.
do.
Bill Tierney asks, what other data sources does RDS have experience with that researchers might use, such as Savvy, Medicaid, Anthem, and other payers, Optum, et cetera?
Yeah, to my knowledge, Regenstrief has not had access to that data, although I'm sure many researchers are finding other ways to access that data. So if it's data sources, you know, Medicaid or Medicare type data, payer data, if it's not coming through the INPC, we don't have access to that today. But that means that, probably to your point, Bill, if we need to be much more aware externally of what are people mixing our data with their data, and do we need an expertise in that? You know, one example was the Precision Health Initiative, where they had a great deal of laboratory generated genomic information and sequencing data. That's going to get more and more prevalent. So if we don't have sources of that, which maybe we should over time, then we definitely need an expertise in connecting to it and helping researchers integrate data that is not all from us. Now, clearly, some researchers are obviously going out and collecting data in REDCap, and we help support those types of tools. But I would love to see us evolve the types of data we get involved in and evolve our connectivity capability with external types of data, because that's the game really in the future. It's less and less are you going to see research specifically aimed at a very discrete, clinical only, tabular type of data. They're going to want to mix imaging data, genomic sequencing, even things like my Apple Watch telling me what my blood pressure is at any one time, right? The more you get more sources of data and the more instrumented the world gets, the more we need to be experts in how you bring that together, or in the data itself and acquiring it. So I think that is one of the things I've talked with Susan about, that both the new president and new CIO would need to understand is what types of data do we grow into, and or what other capabilities, like the ability to connect, would be high on our list. Another great question. You guys are just cool. Any others?
We have others. I didn't know if anybody in here had any other additional questions. Okay. Sean asks another question. Are there examples at other academic organizations where NIH-funded researchers are meeting their feasibility research data needs using self-service tools? If so, can we learn from them?
Great question, Sean. Actually, it so happens that the consulting I was doing for the School of Medicine was exactly in that field. I was doing some benchmarking of what are other leading academic health institutions doing in this same space. And I would say that yes, they are. They are Some of the advanced ones are doing, they've kind of moved beyond the piece that we have around, they have their data all in an OMOP format, but they're also starting to make self-service tools to their researchers. And they're bringing in all kinds of data, bedside data from hospitals, imaging data, genomic sequencing data, et cetera. Now, I would say that all of them tend to focus on a very captive population. So whether it's Geisinger in Philadelphia, whether it's Stanford, UCSF, Harvard, WashU, or Vanderbilt, the ones that I had talked to, they did not have as broad a reach as we have with something like the INPC. So we have a nice strategic strength there. I think the weakness is we're not as far along and we're not as invested. And frankly, we're not as connected and aligned yet with the IU Health and the School of Medicine organizations to enable that self-service for the researcher. It is one of the things I think that we need to do and continue to discuss with those organizations. But the promise out there, the possibilities are really exciting to augment the ability to do research and to do it quicker, to get started quicker is probably a better way to say that. And I think they are very willing. Most of those institutions that I talked to were extremely open, willing to help the IU overall system, including Regenstrief, and quite interested in creating their own tools for people to use. So the community is very open and connected to each other. So the possibilities are very, very good for us down that dimension. And another one, Michelle?
Yeah, I think we have one last one. Kasali Simon asks, I'd like to ask a question on scope of user communities and what users of the data can do to enrich resource availability for everyone.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Kosali. I do believe that I would say the mechanisms that we would provide to surface data and to collect and pull data together is it a critical and important, but is not the most important part. I think the more research collaborators, and I know Kosali, you're doing some of this as well, that are able to get multiple research organizations to pool together and to have agreements on things like standards for the data, on things like common research, some large scale efforts like the All of Us program, et cetera, that are using some tools out there that are available. I think that community is more important than the actual mechanisms of providing the data, if you will. So I would love to see even more collaboration and cooperation across those user groups, creating actual ways to give feedback to both Regenstrief and other providers of these types of data, and really saying what they want and saying what's possible. To me, like I said, the mechanics of providing it is critical and important, and it's what we do. And it's its own science, if you will. But the connection to what is the point of it all and what is the outcome we're looking to achieve is only going to come from the scientist communities pulling together and giving good feedback and or demand and requirements to groups like ours. So we would love to see what part we can help foster those groups. And I would say all commercial IT software vendors who are really good, ones that I have worked with in the past, are really good at this. They provide good user community connections. And in many ways that takes off and those groups work with each other more than they work with the software vendor. That's a good example or a good metric of when that has succeeded as an approach, is that it's actually, they meet more without the vendor than with the vendor. So yes, would love to see more and more of that be encouraged. And if that's it, well, I do appreciate you listening, taking some time on your lunch to do this. Again, remember that RDS is continuing to evolve. We're certainly interested in helping researchers and overall scientific questions get answered and doing it in the different ways that we talked about today. So appreciate the time. Thanks very much.